Hello and welcome to episode 173 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Sigmund Judge. I'm joined once again by my co-host, Mr. Devon Dundee. And, well, it's an exciting time, Devon. The sun's out. The F1 movie reviews are out and are publishing as we record this. It's looking quite good for the film. We'll be talking more about that next week. I have been trying to push you towards a 4DX screening of this because as much as I'd love to experience F1 in 4DX, I'm not able to. So I need to be able to experience this through you, Devon. Are you up for the challenge?
Well, I'll either be going to a 4DX theater or I'll just bring a bunch of iPhones and turn on vibrate mode and set them around my seat as I'm watching F1 at my regular theater. Either way, I'll be sure to let you know. It's cool that the film's going to be released in that format, the first Apple original to be released in that format. And we hope to see Apple continue to do more in that area, which we're going to be talking about later on the show. For now, though, I feel like I'm still coming out of the shock of WWDC last week. I feel like I'm just now starting to really process the information, start to make some lists of things I need to be checking into over the summer. But of course, as with every year, after the big announcements are out of the way and people have time to actually play with the betas, there are always little things that pop up. So we're not going to be going deep on any of the betas right now. We'll wait till the public betas come out and we can talk about them a little bit more then. But I think we each have a couple little tidbits that we wanted to share from betas this week, Sigmund. Is that right?
Yeah, I think like the delightful surprises that we've come to find over the last week. And I want to start with a couple of like first thoughts or first reactions to the media experiences so far. So firstly, when it comes to Apple Music, the auto mix mode on Apple Music has brought a smile to my face more than once or twice in my short time with it. This morning, I was listening to like a R&B classic and hip-hop playlist on Apple Music. It did a fantastic job of syncing everything. There were different transitions, there were beat matches. There was even one point where one of the songs was sped up at the end to match the tempo of the next song coming in. Yeah, it just brought a smile to my face. But when it comes to video, I think this is the one where I was a little bit surprised because the iOS video player controls, each button in the controls within the video player is kind of set on this glass platter. The idea of liquid glass is to remove that barrier between you and the content. And actually, this ends up, in this sense, creating a barrier. So it's very, very interesting. And of course, things will get refined over time, but it was something that I wanted to mention very quickly. Going away from that, and I know you're the Vision Pro guy, but, you know, we're both passionate here. Beyond scrolling with my eyes, which I thought was a ridiculous premise, and it works brilliantly, at least for scrolling media. We'll get into productivity at some point. But what also actually works incredibly well for media playback is the introduction of the spatial web, and it's an absolute game changer for watching videos from sites like Netflix and YouTube, because when you hit that spatial browsing button, you get the UI for like the playlist of videos that you're watching on YouTube, so you can skip to the next video, along with the pop-out video controls. And you've got the screen as well, which, along with the spatial audio that it adapts as well, does such wonders for the web viewing experience for video. And I'm sure this is something we'll get into when it comes to review time, but it does make me wonder whether or not there is a future in app development for Vision Pro, or if this is like the first tease to a post-app future where all of this information is brought to the forefront and then adapted for the platform in a way that it works best. So they're the surprises for me. I mean, again, you're the Vision OS, Vision Pro guy, so what did you think? Because especially on that media playback element, it wasn't something that was touted by Apple at DubDub.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when I pulled up spatial browsing for the first time, I started reading articles. But of course, you would go to the media playback. That makes so much sense. I didn't even think to try it. So I need to get on there and watch a couple YouTube videos in spatial browsing because it looks like a really cool interface from what you were telling me. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out between what Apple's calling the spatial web and, of course, native apps. That's always been a conversation. It continues to be. But anything Apple can do to make web experiences and web apps better on Vision Pro and give web creators tools to make it better and unique to that platform, I think that's for the best. So I'm looking forward to spending some more time with spatial browsing this summer for sure. For me this week, the surprise that I wasn't expecting, I think everyone probably knows I was going to love spatial scenes on my Vision Pro after how sappy I got about the spatial photos last year. It's just, it hits me right in my dad heart, and I'm a very sentimental person, and it works for me. But what I wasn't expecting was to enjoy spatial scenes so much on other platforms because, of course, they don't have the 3D elements, but what the OSs do, I noticed this on my iPad mini of all places. I added a photo widget to my Today view, and immediately I was presented with a photo of my family, but it had been cut out into those 3D layers. And as I moved my iPad, I could get subtly different angles on the photo, a less extreme version of what I was seeing on Vision Pro. And so I wasn't sure how spatial scenes were going to work out on other devices besides the lock screen, which is where Apple's really pushing them on the iPhone and the iPad, but they work great in widgets and in the Photos app as well. And so that was my nice surprise this week, was that I was able to take that experience that I loved so much on the Vision Pro last year and extend it to Photos on all my other devices as well, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've seen a couple of people share like stills from films and then convert them. So I think there was Marty and Doc from Back to the Future. That was the example that I saw, and it looked incredible. And I've got a still from like a Spike Jonze Beastie Boys photo album copybook that I'm using as my lock screen on iOS because I'm running the betas on everything, which is very, very dangerous. And hopefully this recording comes out fine. Yeah, very, very cool. And well, I can't wait to talk more about everything that is coming in September once the public betas release. But for this week, we've got a packed show, Devon. We're going to recap Your Friends and Neighbours. We're going to discuss the new haptic trailer for F1 and how Apple could extend the concept of metadata layers further. But we're going to start this week with the return of the Buccaneers. A group of fun-loving young American girls exploded into the tightly corseted London of the 1870s, setting hearts racing and kicking off an Anglo-American culture clash. Now the Buccaneers are no longer the invaders. England is their home. In fact, they're practically running the place.
Theo and I are happy. You can say that we are nothing. I have to let Guy go. But you know the truth.
The most important person in our lives is each other.
If these last few days have made me understand anything, we need to fight for the people we love. Don't we?
You know I hate to say it, I told you so.
Created and written by Catherine Jakeways, based on the novel by Edith Wharton, and starring Kristen Forsyth, Alicia Bowe, Aubrey Ibrak, Josie Totar, Imogen Waterhouse, Mia Frappleton, Christina Hendricks, and, new this season, Leighton Meester. Of course, we're going into the second season now, but as a fan of the show, what appealed to you about the show's first season? And what are you excited for in this second?
I think it's no secret that I love the first season of the Buccaneers. I had a lot of really great things to say about it, and I'm so excited that it's coming back. But when I think about its first season and what stuck out to me, what I enjoyed the most, I think it has to be the camaraderie of the core group of these girls as they set off on this adventure together. Of course, we get to journey with them from New York across the sea to England as they're these outsiders trying to figure things out, but they've got that bond between them that doesn't break, that kind of gets them through as they're figuring out this new world that they're in. And that was the story that we saw with the first season. And I love that they're strong women navigating a society that doesn't really have room for strong women. And so they really do stand out, not only in the sense that they're American in a British culture, but that they're just these independent people who have their own ideas and their own goals, and they're not going to let society define them and put them into boxes, which I think is really great to see. And they're each in their different situations, and as we come into this second season, each of them are at a different step in their journey, but they have that same strength that they share not only between them, but individually in their own situations as well. And so throughout the first season, what I loved so much was the subversion of cultural norms. They're looking for husbands, but not in the way that you would think. They're not lowering themselves to do so. They're looking to put themselves in positions of power and strength, not to lower themselves in order to find a man. And I just think that whole concept, the way it's all flipped on its head, I think that's very appealing. And I really enjoyed it last season. I'm looking forward to it this season.
I think we should have probably started the conversation to say, you've seen the second season, or at least the beginnings of it. So where does the second season pick up with the Buccaneers, both narratively with their loved ones and tonally? Is it full of the same kind of fun whimsy that the first season brought us?
I think tonally the whimsy is still there. In terms of plot-wise, we're in a much more serious place, I think, at the beginning of season 2 than we were in season 1, because they've grown up a little bit and they've come into these situations that can be quite difficult. But it does continue with the themes of the first season of marriage, status, and sisterhood, both when it comes to blood and otherwise. And we see that throughout the different relationships between the Buccaneers. So Nan, played by Kristen Forsyth, immediately questions her decision to marry Theo, played by Guy Remmers, even though it was, of course, to protect her sister Jenny from her abusive husband. Jenny, played by Imogen Waterhouse, of course, is on the run with Guy, played by Matthew Broome, trying to escape not only her husband, but also the media's watchful eye. Even back at that time, the media was always watching. Nan's mother, played by Christina Hendricks, contends with her own family drama when her sister resurfaces on the cusp of her separation from her husband. And then Conchita, played by Alicia Bowie, and Mabel, played by Josie Tota, comfort their partners as they cope with the news that their father, Lord Brightlingsea, doesn't have long to live, and Conchita's husband, Dick, prepares to take on the family's woes. Finally, our last Buccaneer, Lizzie, played by Aubrey Ebig, strikes up a flirtation with a new suitor who just so happens to be a member of the House of Commons. So you get a little bit of political intrigue there as well. So lots going on with the Buccaneers. There's plenty of love, laughter, dancing, and of course secrets left half buried as this season kicks off. It's a very intriguing premise for the second season here.
I'm interested to know what like the TMZ of back then looks like and how that's depicted. So that's very, very cool. What is it that you're looking forward to seeing play out over the next 8 episodes? Is there a specific thing or a specific character that you want to kind of see them get their comeuppance or get their victory? Or are you following along like multiple strands? Because there seems to be a lot going on.
There is a lot going on. It's a little bit soapy in that sense, but I think there's also a lot to hang your hat on and hold on to. I think the 2 storylines I'm most interested in are, of course, the love triangle between Nan, Theo, and Guy. That's still unresolved, even though all 3 of them think it is. But we learn very quickly that there's still some lingering things hanging there that we're going to have to get resolved throughout the season. And then both Jenny and her mother, although they're in very different places, they're both forging lives of their own, separate from the awful men that they've been stuck with, which I think is cathartic in a sense. If there's one thing I love, it's seeing a bad dude get his comeuppance. And so I'm hoping to see that throughout the season, but more than anything, rooting for those two to really find their place in the world, find a place of safety and security as they're forging their own paths. Then more just on like a general thematic level, I'm excited to see the Buccaneers continue to push the boundaries of their day in ways that inspire us to rethink some of those rules that are still rooted in the old way of thinking that still exists with us today. I think there's always opportunities in every place and culture to think a little more broadly, to give people a little more agency and opportunities. And even though I'm thankful that a lot of those rules from back then don't apply, there are still ways in which some of the thinking, I think, still has a hold on us. And so any ways that we can see those played out on screen and inspire us to do better here, I think that's going to be great. But mostly I just want more time with the Buccaneers as a group because there's always so much fun to be had when they're together. I'm hopeful we can get them all back together in the same room again at some time this season because those parties from season 1 were some of the most fun that we had on screen, the giggles and the dancing and all that. Enjoyed that a lot. So I'm hoping to see more of that kind of levity, hopefully somewhere in the midst of all the heaviness, and to see that played out. I do have to mention also, one of the big things about this series that sticks with me, I'm not always the best at picking up on these things, but with this show especially I have, is the soundtrack. The music for this show is very highly curated from female artists of today, and the creators have even been able to make some deals with certain artists to premiere their songs in the show, including in this first episode, we've got the song premiere of Something to Burn by Maddie Diaz at a really key moment in the episode where the soundtrack and what's happening on screen just meld together in such a beautiful way. And so I love that aspect of the show. I love the way that it goes to bat for female artists today as it's portraying these people from back then. And I think that's a really unique, special part of it that I'm looking forward to seeing how they continue to do that throughout the season as well.
Very, very cool. And I think it would be wrong for us not to mention the costuming in this series. Award-winning costuming from the team behind Buccaneers. And so on a basic level, I'm really looking forward to that as well. Of course, The Buccaneers returns for its second season today on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens. And you know, song premieres during TV series and film releases are a bit of a tried and tested formula that Apple are using at the moment with both the Buccaneers and F1. The new Ed Sheeran track and the hook within it almost sounds like cars racing around a track, which is very, very cool. But Apple Original Films marketing division did something we've never seen before this past week by introducing the world's first haptic trailer, exclusively available in the Apple TV app for iOS and linked in the show notes. It's something I've been thinking about all week, and I think that's quite something considering the week we've just had, because it's a great representation, I think, of the fun and whimsy we still associate with Apple today, and something so accessible that I experienced a lot of surprised eyes, raised eyebrows, and smiles whilst handing over my phone, pressing play and demoing to friends and family over the last week. Immediately, everyone was saying, how has this not been done before? And albeit it's only a trailer, so maybe it doesn't work for, you know, the duration of a film or for a small TV episode. But I think as an experience, and I know this is created for media buzz, so to speak. What was your experience?
I thought this was completely wild, out of the blue. I mean, in the midst of WWDC week, of course, you got all these big announcements for Apple's operating systems, while they're also promoting this huge film, F1. And out of the blue, this thing that they didn't talk about anywhere else, it just shows up. I think I saw it on the App Store, the featured page, and it linked me into the Apple TV app. That's how I came across it. And yeah, I just thought it was such a cool idea. Initially, when I saw it, I thought, okay, how much can haptics really add to a trailer, right? You got this little buzzer in your phone. Okay, it vibrates when you get a call, whatever. Like, how much can that really add to a trailer? And I hit play, and I was immediately amazed at how strong the haptic engine in the iPhone is, and that it can go for that long, that hard. I never realized that. It felt like rumble in a video game, maybe even turned up a little bit more than that. It was really strong, but it's also really effective, I think, especially for a film like F1, where you've got the cars racing, and anyone who's been nearby a car that's revving its engine like that, you know how the air vibrates and the ground vibrates, and they were able to recreate that with this little engine in the phone. I thought it was amazing. I thought it added a lot to the trailer experience, got me, of course, even more excited for F1, which is exactly what they were hoping to do. And I was impressed not only with the integration between the video and the haptics, but with the hardware of the iPhone, and just a little reminder of how powerful these things are too. Super, super cool.
It was also kind of a reminder of what Apple introduced, it feels like years ago now, in iOS, where you could set up particular haptic patterns so that when the phone's vibrating in your pocket, you know who's calling you, which is very, very cool. And I think it just took it a step further and really showed off the prowess of the hardware in regard to how precise and how different, it wasn't just a every effect was incredibly different and precise, and I'm fascinated by the layer that was bedded into that track. When demoing, one friend said to me it brought him back to his days at Autodromo Nazionale di Monza in Italy as a kid, because he said everything back then was a lot more accessible, right? You could literally walk over to a car paddock just before a race and feel the car's power without even touching it. And this haptic experience kind of brought him back to that sense of a connection he otherwise has lost watching F1 today, because, of course, all of the barriers are up and, it's all kind of gate-kept in a lot of ways. And I think the film is going to do something different in that regard and bring people feeling a little bit closer to the sport. But this experience, I think, does that as well. And it got me thinking about something no one's ever really explored: Apple's use of embedded metadata layers over the last couple of years, which has quietly enhanced a lot of the entertainment offerings coming out of the company.
Yeah, Apple's been doing a lot of interesting stuff in this space, and I don't know that we've ever collected it all together in one conversation in this way, but when you look at it, it really is interesting, a lot of what they're doing. Of course, we talked last week about Apple Music Sing, with the karaoke, being able to strip out the lyrics, but have the real-time lyrics playing on screen, which I think is a really cool layer that Apple's added to so much of the Apple Music library. It's continuing to develop with tvOS 26 in the fall. Also in Apple Music, you've got the auto mix between songs, which I agree with you. It's really awesome addition. That is something that the system itself is doing. It's not even something that the publishers have to add as a layer. Apple's bringing that layer in. Another thing that Apple's bringing to the table is music haptics, which I immediately thought of when I saw the haptic trailer. I thought, well, this is a lot like what they're doing with music, but with music, it's a lot more accessible because it's not just one piece of content, right? You can turn it on for whatever music you're listening to, and it's pulling that information again, somehow adding that metadata layer so that more people can enjoy music in more ways. Of course, always makes me think of Coda and the whole conversation about different styles of music that people listen to and why. Mm-hmm. And I love that feature. I think it's great, and seeing it extended in this way is very cool into video. But then also on the video side, you've got Insight, where you can layer on the actors on screen, the music that's playing. That's a whole other layer of metadata specifically for Apple Originals that we always hope to see expand. But there's just all these different ways that Apple is already taking the entertainment that we enjoy and enhancing it with more information and more ways to enjoy it. And I feel like you and I, Sigmund, we're big wishers, we're big imaginers. We always like to think of ways that things can go to the next step. And so we put together this list of ideas we have for more ways that Apple can add metadata to its entertainment offerings specifically and enhance those experiences even more. So I'm going to pass it back to you to kick us off. You want to start with movies and TV?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm treating this as a therapy session and a bit of a kind of let go, right? And just throw out loads of things that could work really well. And I think what's being created here is a potential kind of ecosystem play that no one's really explored. People have talked about, why are Apple in the original series and film space? Why did they get into Apple Music, even though that made more sense because of the history of the iPod and iTunes and everything else? In some ways, I feel like Apple are running before they've walked. Right? They're running in a certain direction, but there are certain basic elements that we've been asking for a long, long time that now that they're doing haptics for a 3-minute trailer, I'm sure they could implement into films and TV shows, maybe starting with Apple Originals. And it begins with playing back a film or a TV show, having the lights dim and having the lights come back up when the credits happen, or staying down if there is a post-credit scene. These are things that we talked about before when theorizing on an Apple TV Pro, which may still come in the future. But seeing that these kind of things are already happening on the current hardware, it makes me think that being metadata play, it doesn't even need to be a pro feature. And then We've got things like aspect ratio masking for projectors, but actually more so for Apple Vision Pro. A disappointment the last week for me was picking up Sinners in the TV app and realizing that the ratio doesn't change. And so you've got the black bars because it's sticking to the IMAX ratio for those few moments in which it's presented in that wider, taller ratio. And so I'd like to see a way of them being able to bring in metadata to fix that issue. And then going back to lighting a second, maybe even a real world extension of Apple Vision Pro could be accomplished with the accent lighting in your room, following what's on screen, a little bit like Philips Hue Sync. And whilst I honestly gave up and sold my sync box because I didn't think it added much, Hue never really were able to refine the experience at all. It was very one and done. You set how extreme you wanted it in the app, and it wasn't able to analyze scene by scene. And that's something that, of course, Apple, having their ecosystem, would have the ability to do. And I'd almost say they could borrow some elements from like a Disney World. I think it's the Haunted Mansion ride, where at points you're watching a video screen, but there are certain elements within that scene that are real that also come to life. So a light flickers, for example, during a spooky moment. You could have those very, very small things actually be queued up within an embedded layer. So you could go from the extreme to really simple, and there would be a refinement process that we're seeing right now with liquid glass, for example, where everything's very extreme, and then you refine down for anything new that you're implementing like this. So they're just a few ideas for video. Where do we want to go next?
The thing I always think about when we talk about Apple extending its entertainment offerings further into the ecosystem is actually integrating between screens. And that's something that Apple added into tvOS a couple of years ago, the ability to make multi-screen experiences. But I don't feel like we've seen a ton of adoption of it. And I think we really need some first-party examples and kind of Apple leading the way on what that can look like. And so there's tons that they could do in that sense. They've got a whole streaming service of series and movies with bonus features that they could embed and surface on your phone. They did it a little bit with For All Mankind back in season 1 with some AR stuff. And they've done it, I guess, actually a lot with For All Mankind in terms of the timeline in the TV app, catching you up on the historical events in the series. So I would just like to see that invested in more, make that a part of the release slate for maybe every Apple original, or at least the tentpole ones, and just make those experiences a part of the viewing experience that viewers can expect, so that other services and developers will pick up on it, and it can just become a part of the entire ecosystem. Like you said, it's not just strengthening Apple's entertainment offerings, it's strengthening their platforms and the experiences that users have on them. So more connection between, I think, the Apple TV and your iPhone and iPad when you're done watching something, or even while you're watching something, to enhance it. I think that would be great.
Yeah. And I think also, if you got a nearby iPad or whatever and it's connected at the same time to what you're watching on the main screen, you could either have picture-in-picture on your iPad if you're watching on your iPad with, a BTS scene of how that scene was made. There's some really interesting sessions out there this year which talk about multi-view and talk about it from a sporting perspective, where maybe you're airplaying a single angle from a broadcast to your Apple TV, and you're watching the main broadcast on your iPad, or vice versa, and you almost become director in a way, which I think is a really interesting prospect as well. I also want to, before we get into sports, I want to talk about the idea of, and we've had this conversation about Apple Intelligence and AI, and how a lot of the information that is obtained by artificial intelligence is scraped off of the internet. What would be a really nice kind of give me back I think, would be, let's say you finish watching the latest episode of Severance. At the end, the screen minimizes and you get a prompt for the next episode. You also get a prompt to say, hey, if you're interested in more information about this, click this button. And then Apple Intelligence will gather lots of resources about that specific episode. Maybe there's a conversation with the DOP of that episode who explains how they achieved a specific scene or transition. Maybe there's an article from Vulture discussing the cultural relevance or, a tidbit there. Or maybe there's a podcast like ours that's discussing the end of a season after you've completed it. Maybe it's just a original soundtrack that makes its way to you, along with some other suggestions. So there's a lot, I think, that could really enhance the experience and things that really Apple and the ecosystem could only do. In terms of sports and games, I kind of want to align the two. Lights for your team colours when you're watching a game. Of course, Apple already has the details of your favourite team, even goal celebrations. I normally get notifications about a goal that's just been scored in real time before the broadcast catches up. So there's definitely a way for Apple to be able to do that, even be it in a live setting. And then, maybe Apple could use the information about your favourite teams shared across Apple Sports and the TV app. And then when you're watching via SharePlay with a friend who supports the other team, the light in both houses changes from the team that person supports to the colour of the team in the lead. And I guess you could do that again with like competitive gaming, right? Especially on the lighting side of things.
Yeah, I'm almost picturing it like a game of Splatoon where the room slowly morphs from one color to the other depending on who wins. And if you're watching together with friends, maybe a house divided type thing where people were in different jerseys, you could watch the room being taken over by one or the other. I think that would be a lot of fun. Microsoft has tried some things with gaming and enhancing the experience. They had that IllumiRoom concept where they were using projectors to enhance the experience, which I think is awesome. Of course, not everyone has the capability to project, but a lot of us have smart bulbs in our homes, and with a little bit of extra metadata in the Home app to understand how those are laid out, I think you could get some cool effects there as well. But it doesn't just have to all be lighting, Sigmund. I think that's a lot of what we're going for because it's just really, it's tangible and it feels like maybe low hanging because a lot of us already have our HomeKit set up and it just makes sense to connect those things. It'd be not trivial, but it's something they could bridge. What else could they be doing with metadata in games?
I think because Apple Arcade works in a different way, right? And so everything that you play there isn't like you only have a certain amount of goes and then a barrier comes in the way in terms of having to pay and that kind of thing. I think there could be a really interesting use case for like metadata within games where maybe you're stuck on a particular puzzle within a game and you need a tip. And maybe there's a conversation layer between you and Siri where you ask Siri for a tip. And the developers can program different tiers of tips depending on how long you've been stuck. And, it doesn't have to just be confined to that speech bubble because, of course, Siri can send you a video or can send you a map or whatever it may be to your nearby device. And you've got a way of being able to deliver things without causing a barrier or restriction. Of course, there's no browser on Apple TV, so that fixes that as well. If they were to come, they would enhance the entertainment aspect of things. Now, I wouldn't call fitness, for me personally, entertainment. I have to have entertainment whilst I'm staying fit to kind of block out the idea that I am actually doing exercise, and because I don't enjoy it, but I do it, and things are going quite well recently. But in terms of fitness and wellness, I think maybe a couple of years ago was the last time we really talked about the idea of environments changing and that kind of thing through lighting during fitness. But are there any other things that Apple could do to enhance what we have? Because we've got our real-time data from our watch, showing on screen for those Apple Watch users out there. But that is pretty much it, right?
Yeah, and I think it's incredible the metadata they've implemented and the way they've done it in real time, but I think it also shows that they could go further with it. And so I think in terms of environmental, what I'm thinking of is when I meditate, I want my room to look like the Vision Pro meditation app. Now, you can't create the shapes of the leaves, but just that gorgeous gradient as you're breathing and the way it changes as your breath goes in and out. I think doing that with smart lighting would be incredible and contribute to that calmness. I know when I meditate in Vision OS, it's just the environment does add a layer to it. And maybe more seasoned meditators don't need that kind of thing, but for me, it leaves me feeling more calm. And I think it's really impressive what they've done there, and I'd love to see that extend into the real world. Then when you're working out, of course, they could flash the lights, change the intensity of them, even change the color of them based on story-based workouts. Especially when I do a cycling workout, a lot of those are based on stories, right? We're going by a hill, we're going by the ocean, we're going to a carnival, whatever it is. And I feel like they could implement color in a way to reinforce that, because the more you immerse yourself in the story, the less you're thinking about how hard you're working. Kind of like you said with entertainment. You kind of need something extra there, and the trainers do an excellent job of telling those stories, but anything that Apple could do metadata-wise to reinforce that, I think would be cool. And then in those moments where you're just supposed to be focused on how hard you're working, when you're pushing yourself as hard as you possibly can, I thought of another Apple device that has haptics, and that's the Apple Watch. A lot of us wear our Apple Watches while we're working out for the heart rate data, but it's also got that haptic engine in there. And if it's anything like what the iPhone has or even close, it could create some really compelling effects in terms of just increasing that intensity, giving you a little bit more motivation to put your all into it. And maybe even, I know that the animations in your real-time data sync up with your heart rate. So maybe they could do something with the haptics syncing up with your heart rate as well, or maybe getting ahead of your heart rate a little bit to try to show you where you're supposed to be going and give you that information on, okay, you've really got to be pushing right now. I think that would be pretty cool. So, haptics while working out, I think there's a lot there. And I think there's just a lot in general. Apple has all this incredible technology. Of course, they're doing amazing things with it, but tying it all together just a little bit closer with that extra layer of metadata. And then, of course, as Apple loves to do, once they get the concept nailed down, creating an API for developers to integrate with it as well. I think that would create some incredible experiences across everything we've talked about and make people enjoy even more the experiences that they get with their Apple devices.
Yeah. As I say, I just think Apple are in a position that no one else is, right? Amazon probably the closest to Apple in that regard, but, innovation-wise, they're not it's more about what's cheap and what's doable, and I think Apple is still very much in a class of their own. It's really gonna, I think, matter as to who does this stuff first. I don't see Google doing it first. Again, I don't see Amazon caring that much. And once Apple do it, if they do it, I mean, we are theorizing, but to me, it makes sense. Maybe it doesn't to listeners. You'll have to let us know. This is how I see the future of entertainment, to be quite honest with you, because even forget about new titles in films and TV shows. I want to be able to experience my favorite films and TV shows in different ways. And that just creates new audiences, repeat viewing. And I think I'd really be interested to know what other streaming services and people behind our favorite apps would think about this concept and what they would necessarily come up with, should this be a future that we do live in. But thank you, Devon, for helping with this therapy session and with some great ideas as well. A post-WWDC therapy session.
You spoke about the future we could live in, Sigmund, but we all know that the future is coming very soon. We'll be living with tvOS 26 as the operating system on our Apple TVs, not just for the brave beta testers out there. And After all the coverage last week, all the breakdowns of different features, something came to the surface that was included with tvOS 26 that we didn't know about. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah, so hidden within the code is a reference to lossless audio and lossless pass-through, which basically would mean that the Apple TV doesn't do a conversion process and then sends a particular audio format to like a receiver or a audio processor to then do the work that way, and therefore you would get higher quality audio maybe. Because of all of the different formats and basically Apple needing to go in the back end and support all of the different formats, we don't know how this is going to work. One thing that I think we know early on is that it's not a support that's going to come universally, but it's going to be something that is worked out on an app by app basis. And then the other element to the audio that's really interesting is Aaron Perris of Mac Room has actually got in touch with me this past week, showed me some code that he'd been digging through, and he found a reference to 9.6.1 audio and there being an option for that. So basically 9.6.1 will add a front wide right and a front wide left channel, along with 2 extra Atmos channels. So I'm kind of getting excited about the prospect of cutting up my wall and ceiling again, Dan. But what's interesting about this is also that it shows that there's going to be an increased throughput for the audio quality that can be delivered through tvOS. Whether it's this hardware or upcoming hardware, we don't know, because none of this, of course, was in the bento box presentation at the end of the tvOS presentation. But it's interesting, and there's a lot of speculation and conjecture flying around. The thing that I would say is set expectations low and hopefully be surprised. But it definitely points to a brighter future. The 9.6.1 aspect, I think, is probably most important, purely because whilst the Apple TV has been able to output in 9.6.1 before, it's been through a private API that only Apple has access to. And now it would seem, at least, that with this reference, that's going to be opened up to third-party app developers. So, really exciting. But what it means for DTSX, what it means for Dolby Atmos, we don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see. In terms of the smart home, as noted by Matter Alpha, Thread 1.4 looks to be coming to Apple TV in the fall as well. In addition to general bug fixes and performance improvements, Thread 1.4 includes the following enhancements, but it's still too early to see what Apple will adopt. They include credentials for sharing safely across third parties, better coverage with Wi-Fi and Ethernet connections, meaning your Thread network could be more flexible for home spaces where its signals barely reach, and Thread 1.4 also aims to improve onboarding and troubleshooting. So, good news there for the home enthusiasts who have been kind of clamoring for something after last week.
Well, it sounds like good news to me, Sigmund. I think for people who are invested in these particular audio codecs and in Thread as a home standard, these are going to be great updates. They're not the big flashy things that get put up on screen, but they are the little improvements for people who are really invested in the ecosystems that do make a big difference. So I'm excited about both of these coming in the fall. Something for fans of Disney to get excited about. Of course, I'm a big fan of Disney Plus. We know this segment based on my Up Next pick history. The service has added a new feature to try to reduce churn and give people more reason to subscribe to the service. And I think this is something that people have been speculating about ever since Disney got into the streaming game. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to be doing. And that is this new Perks program offering U.S. subscribers a variety of bonuses, including free trials for certain services, online shopping discounts, giveaway entries, and of course savings on Walt Disney World bookings, which I think a lot of people who are big Disney fans will be taking advantage of. The service currently offers 12 perks that could change over time, And Hulu is also offering a few perks, including a chance to win items from and inspired by Hulu original series, which definitely speaks to me. I think some prop stuff from Only Murders in the Building or Handmaid's Tale, which is recently wrapped up. So, they could get some of that stuff out the door, and I wouldn't mind getting that as a perk of my Hulu subscription for sure.
I just want the bear chopping board, right? And I'll be happy.
All right. We'll keep an eye out for that one on the perks list. In Vision Pro news, specifically immersive video, there was a big announcement this week that this September, French streamer Canal Plus will release the first Apple immersive video production filmed entirely with Blackmagic's Ursa Cine immersive camera. It's a sports documentary following world champion MotoGP racer Johann Zarco and his team throughout their historic victory at the French MotoGP Grand Prix in Le Mans. Produced in collaboration with MotoGP and Apple, the documentary was filmed using 4 cameras over 4 days to capture the full race weekend in 8K 3D 180-degree video with spatial audio. The film will be available exclusively on Vision Pro via the Canal Plus app with a subscription in France and provided for free to users outside France by MotoGP. You and I have been excited for a very long time about the possibilities of Blackmagic's camera, getting in the hands of more creators, getting third-party immersive video out there. This is the first we're hearing of this happening. It makes a lot of sense that it's happening with Canal Plus, a partner with Apple for quite some time. It's cool that it's going to be available worldwide, not just for subscribers. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun, Sigmund. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm really blown away. I mean, obviously, everything that was announced just last week in terms of tools for filmmakers and how they're able to bring 360 and 180-degree video in. And of course, I've been waiting very patiently. I'm on the wait list for one of these cameras, and I have some plans should that become a reality, because I do understand production's quite slow, and of course priority is coming to production houses like those of Canal Plus, and I'm sure Warner and Sony and others are in on it as well, and we'll have announcements that will be spread out during the coming months. But yeah, I'm really blown away by this. MotoGP is, we talk about F1, right? MotoGP is really kind of hair-raising, right? Because their knees are literally touching the ground going around these corners. And yeah, I don't know how they're going to be able to capture that, especially being that close to the ground. And I'm very interested in the way that they do all of this. But of course, there was an announcement from Canal Plus on social media this week with a couple of teaser images alongside the press release. But yeah, September can't come soon enough. And I'm so happy that I don't have to find some weird finagled way of getting a Canal Plus subscription to be able to watch this. Yeah, hopefully day and date, right?
I would certainly hope so. We don't have exact date details yet other than September, and that there'll be more details soon. Of course, as we hear anything else, we'll be sure to let listeners know so we can all look forward to this documentary when it does release worldwide.
Well, let's talk about some Apple original news this week, starting with, of course, the debut of the full trailer for Foundation Season 3. It's coming very quickly, July 11th. So we're going to save all of our thoughts for the premiere, because there's a lot of Apple original news this week, starting with some new release news. One that I'm very, very excited about, Devon, because I got to see this last year at London Film Festival. All of You, starring and co-written by Brett Goldstein of Ted Lasso and Shrinking fame. It's got a premiere in select theatres and on Apple TV Plus on September 26th. It's also from director and co-writer William Bridges, with the film starring Goldstein and Imogen Poots as two best friends whose relationship is disrupted by a test that claims to match soulmates together. 12 years later, they find themselves trying to resist the urge to disrupt the paths their lives have taken, marriage, children, and tragedy, despite the undeniable feeling they belong together. And this is very much a sci-fi romantic drama in the mold of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Apple original film Fingernails from a couple years ago, but with a British charm and I think a softer underbelly that you could tickle. I hope that's a nice way of putting it. And hey, that would be great for a poster, that quote. Who knows?
Well, either way, I think we're both excited to see this one coming as an Apple original, to have a date for it. I think, like you said earlier, September just can't come soon enough, Sigmund, for a lot of different reasons. And of course, those reasons include Season 5 of Slow Horses, premiering September 24th on Apple TV+. We know that Season 6 has already been shot, but this week we got news about the 7th season of Slow Horses, of course led by the newly knighted Sir Gary Oldman, which will begin shooting in the UK this September. In casting news, Rachel Brosnahan has been cast in the leading role for the 2nd season of Presumed Innocent, following the show's pivot to an anthology format. Developed by David E. Kelly and based on the upcoming book Dissection of a Murder by Joe Murray, the season will follow Layla Reynolds, a defense attorney who finds herself in over her head when her first murder case is that of a high-profile, well-respected judge. Cool to hear more about what's happening with the 2nd season of Presumed Innocent, a show that we both enjoyed, weren't sure what the future was going to look like, but they're switching to a different book for the second one, whole new cast, and that's great to see. Also, Dylan O'Brien from Saturday Night will star alongside Ruth Madley and Mark Ruffalo in Apple original film Being Human from Sean Hayter. This is the 3rd week in a row we've talked about this film. I know we're both very much looking forward to it, and the cast is just continuing to come together as that film is underway. In awards news this week, we got the Gold List for television, honoring the most outstanding Asian achievements in television, with several awards and honorable mentions for Apple originals, including Pachinko receiving an honorable mention for directing for Arvin Chen and Sang-gil Lee, and 2 honorable mentions for lead performance, of course, for Min-ha Kim and Lee Min-ho. For Severance, Deechin Lockman took home the award for supporting performance, and the show got an honorable mention for outstanding writing for Wei-Ning Yu. And for the studio, Chase We Wonders came home with honorable mention for supporting performance as well. Congratulations to all those winners.
Let's talk about this week's releases, starting today with the return of the Buccaneers, alongside a new episode of Stick, which seems to be getting tongues wagging a lot, and a lot of press for this show, which I'm so happy to see. On Friday, we've got new episodes of Murderbot and Long Way Home, alongside a night of Friday Night Baseball, with New York Mets at Philadelphia Phillies at 7 p.m. Eastern, followed by Kansas City Royals at San Diego Padres at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And on Monday, we see the premiere of new Apple original podcast, The Charles Ponzi Story. Having just had its podcast reading at Tribeca this week, the 8-part series hosted by Maya Liu and featuring award-winning comedian, actor, and podcast host Sebastian Maniscalco, the series follows a broke immigrant in Boston who becomes one of America's richest, most infamous men, practically overnight. It's available to Apple TV Plus subscribers, with all 8 episodes dropping in one hit, and non-subscribers will get access to the first 2 episodes, with a new episode dropping weekly thereafter. Over 100 years on, and with Ponzi schemes and crypto rug pulls more prevalent than ever, this is a really fun and interesting way to find out the origins and history of the Ponzi scheme and its namesake. So one that I'm really looking forward to. And yeah, I'm really into my podcasts at the moment whilst doing my walks in the morning and the afternoon. And hey, the longer the days are, there's more time to walk. But when I need to take a break, sometimes I want to jump into a little extra or two. So what have we got for us this week?
Lots of extras this week, Sigmund, for your downtime, starting with F1 The Movie's world premiere red carpet live stream. That's available to replay on YouTube. We'll link that in the show notes. For Government Cheese fans, we've got a behind the scenes of Paul Hunter's creative vision. For Murderbot, we've got Get Your Own Sec Unit Today. Then a couple of interviews with Zane Lowe this week, including Bono for Bono's Stories of Surrender and Ben Stiller for Severance. Both of those we'll link in the show notes. Also for Severance, we've got The Ballad of Burton Irving. Long Way Home, Guess the Bike with Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman, as well as an Apple Maps guide, Tour Europe with Long Way Home, with all the destinations that they went to along the series. For Chief of War, we've got a behind the scenes of casting King Kamehameha. Slow Horses cast appeared on Late Show this week, and Tim Cook and Lewis Hamilton were interviewed by Variety talking about F1, but also just Apple TV Plus and Apple Originals in general. So lots of extras across all of Apple Originals to check out this week. Links to everything right in the show notes.
One of the standout points for the interview between Zane Lowe and Ben Stiller for me was the news of Meet the Parents 4. I'm really, really looking forward to that. But whilst we wait for that, we're going to meet your friends and neighbours. Because it's now time for our spoiler recap. After being fired in disgrace, Andrew Cooper, a hedge fund manager still grappling with his recent divorce, resorts to stealing from his neighbours' homes in the exceedingly affluent Westmont village, only to discover that the secrets and affairs hidden behind those wealthy facades might be more dangerous than he ever imagined.
I'd been thinking, these houses have all this stuff no one would miss for a while, if ever.
Rich guy loses his big job, turns to petty crime.
What's the worst that could happen?
Something is going on with him.
I just need to know how long I could float on what I got.
6 months, tops.
For a guy with no job, we sure are busy.
I'm in trouble.
How bad?
From Apple Studios and Tropper Inc., created, directed, and executive produced by Jonathan Tropper as part of his overall deal with Apple TV+, starring Jon Hamm, Amanda Peet, Olivia Munn, Mark Tolman, Lena Hall, Amy Carrero, Eunice Bay, Isabel Marie Gravett, Donovan Colin, and Hoon Lee. We're about to delve into spoiler territory, and we'd hate to be the ones to steal a cracking series away from you by ruining it, so please, if you haven't seen all of Season 1 just yet, skip to the next chapter and come back soon, because spoilers begin in 3, 2, 1. This season we begin with Jon Hamm's Coop feeling on top of the world until he walks in on his wife cheating on him with his best friend, resulting in him losing his marriage, his family, and his house in quick succession, followed by his cushy finance job, which he's fired from unjustly, at least in his eyes. And that leads to him desperately trying to keep up appearances and his lifestyle, with Coop beginning to rob his own friends and neighbours, stealing expensive watches, jewellery, and selling the stolen merchandise to a pawn shop owner named Lou. Along the way, he discovers the deep, dark secrets of his neighbours, including affairs and SAT cheating scandals that he uses to his advantage. But as Coop spirals deeper into the criminal underworld, he finds a partner in a housekeeper named Alina, played by Amy Carrero, and the two end up on the wrong side of an art deal, which leads to trouble with a dealer named Christian, played by Olafur Darri Alfsson. Coop hits a new personal low point when he robs the house of his sort of girlfriend, Sam, played by Olivia Munn, only to find Sam's estranged husband dead in the entryway. And it's that experience that spurs Coop to try to reconnect with his family, making progress only for that to be interrupted by an attack from Christian's henchmen that lands Coop and his best friend Barney in the hospital. Coop then comes under suspicion by the local police, ultimately being arrested for murder, forcing him to conduct his own investigation and discover that Sam's husband took his own life and that Sam tried to cover it up in order to get his life insurance money. And the season ends with Sam being arrested, Coop going free before being offered his old job back. But just when we think he's going to hit the reset button and get his old life back, Coop skips out on his big business meeting to rob his boss while he's out of town, doubling down on his criminal enterprise. And, well, that is a lot. I will say I absolutely loved the finale and the twist at the end, but whilst I did enjoy the series, Devon, I don't want to cheapen the show by any means because it's extremely well written and it's one that clearly found the kind of mainstream audience that we've seen gather for the likes of The Morning Show and Presumed Innocent. But to me, it was a little like watching something made for the early 2000s, the OC crowd, now that we're all grown up, middle-aged, and far more cynical now that we've faced the realities and pressures of life. I genuinely had a blast watching this, but I don't think it hit the early heights of the premiere episodes for me. What began as a voyeuristic underdog story took a couple of turns I wasn't expecting, including a more dramatic and less whimsical tonal change, but that could have just been me setting my own personal expectations too early, and maybe what I was expecting wouldn't have had the legs for a 9-episode run. Let's get into some of the detail here, Devon. But first, what were your overall thoughts of the season? Of course, much hype, a big audience, but did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it a lot. I do see a little bit of what you're saying about, I think the show maybe became more focused on Coop specifically throughout the season, whereas the first few episodes we were getting more introduced to his community and the people around him, and I enjoyed those aspects as well. I feel like maybe we needed that introduction to those people so that we understood the stakes as he started robbing them. Like, it wasn't just random people he was robbing, it was these people at the parties that he was going to. And we do get moments of him with those other people at different times throughout the season. But I agree with you, it does get more focused on the drama and the peril and the seriousness of Coop's situation as he finds himself deeper and deeper into this enterprise that he started. But I think it's an interesting take on the guy who loses it all story from his point of view. I mean, we've all heard that story, right? And normally that guy's the villain. And in this instance, we get to see him as the hero in some ways. And when we talked about the debut of the season, I said I was surprised that I liked Coop as much as I did, because as much as he is someone who makes mistakes, does things I don't agree with, he's not someone that I hated watching. He's not an anti-hero by any means, and he's someone you can root for even as he's doing these things that don't make a lot of sense to me. So the season had some interesting twists, but I don't think it relied solely on the twist to keep me interested. I was invested in the characters and their journeys beyond just, there were a couple of episodes that ended, of course, on a cliffhanger to make sure you come back next week, and they've got to do a little bit of that to keep people interested, and I understand that. But for me, it was less about the twists, more about the story and the investment that I had in Coop and his family and their relationships, and hoping for the best for them, even as I could see what was coming, which wasn't always necessarily good. So I thought it was overall a great season of TV. I understand why Apple would want more of it. I understand why it connected with such a broad audience the way that it did, and I'm happy that this is the title that got out there and got people interested. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it quite a bit as it wrapped up.
And that's understandable, given Jon Hamm and this being his lead debut on Apple TV Plus after starring in the Everyone But Jon Hamm campaign and, of course, the third season of the morning show. If there was one thing not to question going in, it was his casting and what we could expect from him going in terms of his performance, right?
Absolutely. I mean, not surprising at all that he's a compelling leading man. And what he brings to this role is that typical charm and the understated humor that we've come to expect from him, which we've seen him doing for years and years and years. It's just the Jon Hamm effect, right? You bring him on and he brings that with him, which I think is incredible. But what I thought was new here, and I appreciated a lot, I think there's a bit of relatable humility to this character that I think we haven't necessarily seen from him on screen. We've seen him play these powerful men, morning show, he's literally a billionaire, right? And that very much fits with the aura that he gives off. But here we see that guy 5 years later when things have not gone his way, right? And he has to contend with the fact that you're not just going to keep going up and up and up forever. And that's a moment I think we all hit in our lives, hopefully not in such an extreme way, but I think at some point we all have to realize that, life can get hard. And if you make the wrong decisions, there are consequences for those things. And so seeing him incorporate that into that character, I thought it was really compelling and a new angle to him that I think fits so well with his humor, especially, but was something that was new, at least for what I've seen from him.
The other thing, Mad Men, right? Jon Hamm's always played the a-hole and almost became typecast for that kind of character. And so there is still a little bit of that in here, but the dad comes out a lot more. And that is something that I feel like I attach to beyond the character's other misgivings. We've all been in a place of love lost. And seeing him try to repair that is really compelling as well. Now, one thing we talked about when the series premiered was the way the crime element was woven throughout the show and not limited just to Coop's misdeeds. How did that translate for you?
I think you nailed that on the head during our highlight. I was focused on what Coop was doing, but there's crime throughout this. Everyone in this show is doing some kind of underhanded thing, and I think that's almost like a theme of the show that emerges is like, yeah, Coop is breaking in and taking these people's stuff, but that may not be the worst thing that's happening in this community as people are cheating each other and just doing all these awful things. And I think that kind of plays into maybe a little bit the affluence of the people we're watching as well. They think they're above the rules, and so you get to a point where you think that you can break them. But I think for those of us who don't live in those giant houses behind a gate and can't get away with these kinds of things, there is like a strange wish fulfillment throughout the show as you see these people doing these things, because we all have the urge to break the rules and take shortcuts from time to time, right? We all wish that we could just do the easy thing, and even if we decide not to do that because it's not the right thing to do, there is something about seeing people do it on screen that I think is just, it makes for compelling TV. They can get away with it, again, because they're rich, which isn't the case for all of us, but it can be cathartic in a way to see that even people on that level deal with internal issues and they need an outlet, though we should all probably choose less destructive ways of dealing with our feelings than robbery and arson and keying random people's cars, which never came back around, by the way. That was episode, 2? And we never talked about it, but I have a feeling that might come back up in season 2. But yeah, it feels like every character in the show committed some kind of misdemeanor, at least, maybe even a felony, and not a lot of consequences. But it's very interesting to see how that played such a central part of the series in a way I didn't necessarily expect.
I still feel a bit bad for the store owner that wanted his jar of jam back and got confronted by Coop. Oof, what a scene. Did you anticipate a murder investigation becoming the central point of the season's final few episodes? It felt like a sweeping change that evidently is resolved way too quickly. How did you interpret it? Do you agree? It was there one day and then gone tomorrow?
It was definitely a quick one, especially given the way that they set it up so early in the season. It's the first scene of the series is him discovering the body, but then we go back and we spend like 7 episodes figuring out how he actually got there, maybe even 8. There's a lot of story leading up to it.
I mean, I'll be honest, I actually forgot by the time it swung back around. I forgot about the first episode and that entrance. So it was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's what they were going for, like a got you kind of moment there. I kept waiting to see the house again, and I never recognized that stairway until we did finally get to it. It's like, oh, okay, here we go. This is where we're at. I think it makes sense in a way that this is the path that Coop has gone down. Right? He's chosen crime, and even though he didn't kill anybody, he's still getting mixed in with these people who are getting him into trouble. He's still getting on the police's radar. And I think what the murder plot does, it's a really interesting move story-wise, I think, is it makes him accountable for his actions in a way that doesn't end the whole premise of the show. He can still go back to burglary because that's not what he got caught for, right? So he does get in trouble with the police. He does end up in jail. All those things that we expected to happen, but it had nothing to do with any of the actual crimes that he was committing. And so I think it made sense within the world of the show. And going back to the family dynamics, I think it actually did make for some great conversations between Coop and his loved ones, especially him and his ex-wife and him and his son, because I've never really thought about those days after you get arrested for murder. Like, what is that like for you and your loved ones? You're out, but what do? You can't go to work. You can't really do much. You can work on your case a little bit, but I mean, Coop didn't have much of a case to begin with. He was being framed pretty handily by Sam. And so he's just having these conversations with his family about, well, what is life going to look like? And, are you going to fight for us this time? And so I thought it reflected back in some really interesting ways. More than anything, I thought it was probably a story device, again, to ramp up those consequences without ruining the fact that, well, there is going to be a second season. So he's still got to be robbing houses or we don't have much of a show, right? So it was an interesting decision. It did feel kind of like a lot of things were getting thrown at us at once. He got mugged. He got accused of murder. oh, by the way, he's still an art thief. Like there was a lot happening, but by the end, they cleared the decks, and now he's back to just being an art thief, right? And back to the basics of the show.
Yeah. I thought it was very interesting, the dynamic between Coop and Sam, in the sense that it always felt like whatever she was asking was a trick. And I think it was also kind of a test in the end to see how well she could manipulate him and frame him. So that was really interesting for me. And the world of Your Friends and Neighbours, it's fully populated with an array of characters, Sam being one of them, but many of them we didn't even cover in our synopsis. Who stood out for you? I guess we've really got a lead with Olivia Munn as Sam.
Yeah, I think she's a really interesting character. And you said that every question she asks him is a trick, and I agree with you, but I think every question she asks is a trick to herself as well. Like, she doesn't know she's not going to be happy with either answer just because of the life situation that she's in. She wants to be loved. She wants that partnership, but at the same time, she's so distrustful because of what's happened with her husband and all these awful things that are going on. And, she's seen Coop's story play out. She sees where she's headed. Right. And so it's a really interesting dynamic between the two of them. He's just a little bit further down the same road as she is, and she knows he's never going to be that person for her. Right. And so ultimately, that relationship turns into a totally different thing. She ends up using him and getting him thrown in jail so she can get some money, right, to support her kids. It's a very interesting dynamic. But I think there's also a lot of similarities between the two of them in terms of dealing with the inevitability of growing older, not being at the center of the universe anymore, and seeing that world that you thought you had built crumble. I think there's just something very real about that. And I like that we get a little bit of a different take on that from her as opposed to Coop. And we can see how that can turn out for someone else. I thought she played the turn at the end really well and realistically. She wasn't setting out to frame someone for murder. She kind of fell into it as just her best possible option. And Coop just made it way too easy on her with all of his weird stuff that he was up to, and it just made it way too easy. I thought she actually stuck to the character pretty well without leaning into like becoming a villain or anything like that. And that last conversation between the two of them where Coop leaves and he's like, "You're not going to shoot me because you're not a killer." And all she could do is stand there, right? That she has no leverage at that point. I thought that was really interesting. So their dynamic changed a lot throughout the season, but it was a very interesting performance from her. Lena Hall as Allie, who's Coop's sister, coping with her mental health. We didn't talk about her in the synopsis because there was just too much happening, but she was a really interesting addition to the season as well, getting to see the ups and downs of their relationship. I actually love getting to see Coop as a brother. I think that makes him very endearing, the way he supports her, but also the way she supports him and the insight that she has to offer, because she's someone who lives with mental health struggles, and we see her go through that throughout the season. But that doesn't mean she's someone who has to just totally rely on other people or can't help out in ways. And I think that a lot of times she has a more realistic perspective on Coop's situation than he does and has a lot to say there. And she also brought that musical aspect to the show that I enjoyed so much. Her performances I thought were great, and the passion that she brought, especially to that last performance that she did in the series, I thought was excellent. So I hope that she stays a central character and that they continue to implement that in the second season as well.
Yep, more Allie in season 2, please, please, please. Lastly, let's talk about Hunter, the character from Donovan Colin. He's a kid that's thrown into a situation he didn't understand and has really no control over.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because he starts off so sheltered, and you could tell that his parents' divorce really impacted him and stunted him, I think, in some ways, in terms of opening up to people and being willing to accept other people into his life. And as much as he wants to connect with others, that's just a struggle that he has. And so we get to see him throughout the season overcome a lot to come out of his shell and land in a really good place. And that makes me really happy to see. We all go through things in life, and going through something at such a young age like that can really leave an imprint on someone. But the way he learns to trust again, he ends up connecting with his peers and also reconnects with his dad. I think that's really cool to see. And I think we're also going to get some musical stuff from him as well going forward. It seems to be hinted with his relationship with Allie. I think that could be another avenue for music in this show. So yeah, Hunter was great. I think both the kids did a great job. Again, it's an important aspect of these family dynamics that can get glossed over, but I like the way they were incorporated into the series.
Season 2 is in production right now as we speak. And of course, Season 1 available in full on Apple TV Plus right now to stream across all of your screens. I'm going to end this in a like Cisco and Ebert type style. Overall, Devon, 2 thumbs up for Your Friends and Neighbors?
Absolutely, 2 thumbs up. And if you're listening to this and haven't watched it yet, definitely check it out. It's worth a watch, and get ready for season 2 because there's more Your Friends and Neighbors coming. Beyond Apple Originals this week, Sigmund, of course, we always like to share our TV app highlights of things that people can stream through the TV app from other providers. What's streaming this week?
Well, we're going to start with the streaming debut for the latest Final Destination film, Final Destination Bloodlines. I had such a blast seeing this in theatres. Plagued by a violent and reoccurring nightmare, a college student heads home to track down the one person who might be able to break the cycle of death and save her family from the grisly demise that inevitably awaits them all. Final Destination is a horror series that I hold dear to my heart because it's about a happenstance that's controlled by death, who goes after people and their bloodlines this time round, of those that cheated death the first time around. It is great classic horror filmmaking. Just some of the set pieces at play. If you remember the Mythic Quest lockdown episode, where they all got together on a FaceTime call and created this Rube Goldberg machine, which went through all of the different calls and they celebrated at the end. Think that, but controlled by a merciless death. It's such a blast. So I highly recommend checking that out. Also this week is Friendship, which is coming to PVOD. This was an up next pick of mine literally weeks ago. So it's really surprising to see this come to PVOD so quickly. Again, an acquired comedic taste, but I think you'll have a blast. And it's got Paul Rudd in it, so, you know, likeable Paul Rudd. Who doesn't like Paul Rudd? Even in the Nintendo ads, he's good. And finally, we end with a Hulu documentary, Sally, which explores the life and legacy of astronaut Dr. Sally Ride, focusing in on her groundbreaking achievements as the first American woman in space and her personal life, including her 27-year-old relationship with Tam O'Shaughnessy, which was kept secret until her death. Really fascinating story, and one that I can't wait to explore this week on the Apple TV app. But we've got some up next picks this week as well, streaming at home, and one presenting itself in a very different place for me and around the world theatrically this week.
I'll start with my at-home pick. This Friday is finally the day you'll be able to stream a Minecraft movie on HBO Max. So for those of you who've been waiting to watch it when it comes to streaming, it will be available. This, of course, directed by Jared Hess of Napoleon Dynamite and Nacho Libre. If you know those 2 films, you'll immediately know if this one is for you. These got a lot of play in my house growing up, so I very much know the humor, and I know what to expect with this one. It stars Jason Momoa, Jack Black, Danielle Brooks, Jennifer Coolidge, and others, and of course it's inspired by the video game that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Sigmund. Everyone I know plays Minecraft, and I tried to learn Minecraft from my nephew one time, and I think I ended up getting attacked by a zombie before I could actually finish building whatever it was that I was working on. But I do plan on checking this one out. You know, it's a good family watch this weekend, and it's on HBO Max this Friday.
It's also available in 3D in the TV app, so I'll be interested to know if that 3D presentation is also available on Apple Vision Pro through HBO Max. We'll have to wait and see on that one, but keep a beady eye out for that. And, well, I've got a few theatrical screenings planned this week, including a trip to Sheffield Documentary Fest for an early screening of upcoming Apple original film documentary Come See Me in the Good Light. And I've also got the European premiere for F1 on Monday, so if you see me, please do come say hello. But my pick for this week is one that is seeing a global theatrical release, and that's 28 years later. It's shot on iPhone 15 Pro Max and in cinemas this week. And as this episode publishes, I'll actually be checking into a special screening being held at St Anne's Limehouse Church in East London. The setting for a pivotal scene in the original 2002 British zombie thriller 28 Days Later. This is the third film in the series, following 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later, which starred Academy Award winner Cillian Murphy, alongside Apple Original stars Naomie Harris, Rose Byrne, Idris Elba, and All About You's Imogen Poots. And it's about a post-apocalyptic Britain overrun by zombie-like killers. It actually introduced the first depiction of zombies fueled by this rage-like virus that had them running at you rather than just slowly bumping into one another, and was largely inspired by the speed of the dogs in the original Resident Evil game on PlayStation, compared to, again, the slow zombies that weren't particularly scary and more eerie until that point. And of course, we've seen that kind of zombie depicted in more and more films and TV shows, The Last of Us, Zombieland, just to name a couple. This film's also brought to us by Academy Award nominee Alex Garland as the writer, and once again directed by Academy Award winning director Danny Boyle. And it promises to deliver a terrifying news story set in the same Britain, but 3 decades after the rage virus escapes from a biological weapons factory. And it stars Killing Eve's Jodie Comer, alongside Cool's Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Sinner's Jack O'Connell, the incomparable Ralph Fiennes, and 14-year-old newcomer Alfie Williams. And for those going to see it, be on the lookout for a scene around halfway through, which was created using a custom rig of 20 iPhone 15 Pro Maxes with custom PL lens DOP adapters made by Beast Grip. Speaking to IGN recently, Danny Boyle said that there is an incredible shot in the second half of the film where we use the 20 rig camera, and you'll know it when you see it. It's quite graphic, but it's a wonderful shot that uses that technique, and in a startling way that kind of kicks you into a new world rather than thinking you've seen it before. Basically, it's a poor man's bullet time, and it gives you 180 degrees of vision of an action, and in the editing you can select any choice from it, either a conventional one camera perspective or make your way instantly around reality, time slicing the subject, jumping forward or backward for emphasis. And needless to say, Devon, I'm extremely excited to see this film and learn more about its behind the scenes process during a very special Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, I can feel your excitement now. And I have to tell you, I would not be going into that church to watch that movie. And I hope you come out okay. I guess we'll find out next week, Sigmund. But I do hope you enjoy that screening as well as all the screenings that you're going to this week. Sounds like an awesome week to be watching some films. That's all from us this week. Of course, thank you so much for listening. You can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes. And you can reach out via our contact form, also linked in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you.
We'll be back next week with the debut of Apple Original Series Smoke, and we'll be recapping the European premiere of F1 with a couple of special guests. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a rooming good time.